Okay, it's 5:30, so we will go ahead and get started. My name is Kate Johans, and I am the Marketing and Communications Director here at ATPE. I'm very excited to be here this evening with ATPE Managing Attorney Paul Tapp, who is here to tell us about HB 3979, which is a pretty interesting bill that the 87th Legislature passed. And he's also going to update us on some pending legislation that's under consideration during the special session. So a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. Paul has about 15 minutes of slides to go through. It's a pretty dense law. And then at the end, we will definitely want to answer any questions that you have. So please use the Q&A to submit your questions, and we will go from there. So without any further ado, Paul, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, thank you very much, Kate, and thank you all for joining us this afternoon. I know that it is hard to think about anything other than COVID these days, but this is a law that is going to be important to you all in the classroom starting tomorrow. It actually goes into effect tomorrow, September 1st. And so we wanted to get the word out there to the teachers to let them know what it is that this law does. There's a lot of media coverage about it when it first passed, and then again, COVID tended to knock all of that off of the air. And so I haven't heard a lot about it before, but again, something that you need to know. So let's get right into House Bill 3979. Now, again, a lot of the media focused on one aspect of this bill and kind of referred to it as the critical race theory bill, but it actually goes a lot farther than that. And some of the most important stuff for you to know actually doesn't really have anything to do with critical race theory at all. So let's get into what the bill actually does do. There's 4 components of this bill. We're going to go through each of the 4. The first is that it modifies the TEKS for civics classes. The second is, and this is the important one, as far as I'm concerned, as an attorney that's been working with teachers for about 25 years, it describes what any teacher, again, this is not just social studies or civics classes, but this is any teacher must do when they are discussing current events in their class. Again, this is, I think, where one of the real danger points are in this bill, and things that teachers, one of the things that teachers really need to know. Next, it prohibits class credit for students' engagement in political process. Something that a lot of teachers, again, mainly history, government, civics teachers did in the past. It's prohibited now. So it's important for you to know what it is that you can't do. Finally, it does prohibit teaching concepts that are commonly understood as critical race theories. We're going to spend some time going over what it is the bill actually says you can't do in the classroom. But without further ado, let's get into that first topic about modifying the TEKS in civics classes. Now, this is something that's going to be important at some point, but this is not something you really need to know tomorrow. Because what the bill does is it requires the State Board of Education to look at the TEKS and include particular topics and writings in the TEKS. So this is something that's going to have to go through the State Board of Education before it actually comes to the school district. Now, the bill that we have as law now, it's really interesting. If anyone has seen it, it literally has 3 pages worth of required topics that the State Board of Education is supposed to include in the civics, social studies TEKS. Those go from everything from the Declaration of Independence and the US Constitution to the writings of George Washington, to the Federalist Papers, to the first debate between Abraham Lincoln and Stephen Douglas, to the writings of Frederick Douglass. It covers a lot of ground. Like I said, literally, it is 3 pages worth of topics that are supposed to be included in the TEKS. Not exactly sure how any teacher in any civics class is going to manage to cover that if this actually remains in the law. But again, it's not something that you're going to need to worry about tomorrow. This is something that's going to have to filter through the State Board of Education first, get included in the TEKS, then go to the district level. It's going to have to look at textbooks. So this is not something that is going to be important for you to know tomorrow, but it is something to be aware of because you may be hearing from your curriculum directors about changes to courses, you social studies or civics teachers that are out there. So be aware that may be coming. Next, and this is the important one, as like I said, as an attorney that likes doing these presentations, but really spends most of my time working with individual teachers, this is the one that's important for you to know. When this is the law that pertains to you discussing current events in your class. Now, it's important to know that, again, most of this law only applies to civics or social studies. This applies to all teachers, not just civics or social studies teachers. It applies to everyone. It puts teachers in a very difficult position. How does it do that? Well, let's get into what the law says. There's two parts to this. The first part is that it states that a teacher, this is not the difficult part, I'll tell you right off the bat, states that a teacher cannot be compelled to discuss a particular current event or widely debated and currently controversial issues of public policy or social affairs. Now, again, nothing really controversial about that. It's basically saying you can't be required to talk about current events or, controversial things that are going on right now. I don't know of any teachers that, other than a few classes out there that are on current events, that are ever really required to talk about these things. Well, this law says if you ever felt required to talk about something that's going on in the news right now, you can no longer be required to do that. Yeah, this is not the dangerous part, though. The dangerous part is the second part of this. And that basically states that a teacher who chooses to discuss a topic described in subdivision 1, that is what we just talked about. Again, chooses to talk about current events or widely debated social issues, shall, to the best of that teacher's ability, strive to explore the topic from a diverse and contending perspectives without giving deference to any one perspective. Now, let's unpack that a little bit. What does that actually mean? First, it's important for you to know when you're talking about a law, the term shall is synonymous with the term must, mean the same thing. So you could read this law in saying that a teacher must, to the best of that teacher's ability. Now, I'm not sure what would actually limit a teacher's ability to explore topics from diverse and contending perspectives. What would really keep you from being able to do that? So what this law is saying is you've got to do it. Diverse and contending perspectives, what does that really mean? It means you've got to explore all sides of an issue. And then it goes on to saying without giving deference to any one perspective. What does that mean? It means you as a teacher can't take sides. You can't say, again, you've got to explore these topics from diverse and contending perspectives without taking sides to any one perspective. I will tell you, there is huge danger there. Let me give you an example. We've all been reading a lot about Afghanistan now, right? And talking about the Taliban and, oh gosh, what is the Taliban going to do once it takes over? One of the things I know I've been reading about in the news is from what the Taliban did when they were in charge of Afghanistan before, they had issues with girls attending school and attending school through the same level that the boys attended school. So you're a teacher, you're going around your class and one of your kids say, hey, I read that in Afghanistan, the girls weren't going to be able to go to school anymore. And you decide, well, this is a topic we'll talk about. You are going to be required to, again, look at this topic through diverse perspectives. In other words, you've got to equal to the idea that, fortunately, is the idea that holds sway in the United States, that girls have equal opportunity to education as boys. You've got to look at it through the Taliban's eyes too. Well, maybe there's a question. Maybe culturally, girls shouldn't attend school the way that boys do. Again, you're not supposed to give deference to any one perspective. So guess what's going to happen when your kids go home to their parents and say, guess what my teacher said in class today? She said that girls shouldn't be getting educated the way that boys do. What's going to happen then? all you did was follow the law. Because again, the law requires you, if you're going to talk about these things, to examine them from all sides and not take a side yourself on this. That's going to be a very tricky thing for you in this situation. I cannot tell you there is a great way around this, because again, law is very clear. Cannot give difference to any one perspective. We have, hopefully it doesn't happen, but we have a terrorist attack. Are you going to have to actually give equal time to the terrorists? Well, you got to understand the terrorist point of view too. Guess how well that's going to go over? The law says you have to do that, though. Again, it's something that's important for you to know that this is what the law says. And again, I cannot tell you that there is a great way around this. I will tell you that this is something that was brought up when the law was being debated in the legislature, that these issues, these very issues, the examples that I have given, not the Afghanistan one, but terrorism actually was brought up to the legislature, but they still passed the law as it is. Again, it's important for you to know that there is this danger when you're if you discuss current events, particularly controversial current events, you're going to have to deal with the fact that either you're going to follow the law and you're going to have to examine all sides and not take a personal position on any side, or you're going to, and if you do that, risk what's going to come out of it, or you're going to do what normally probably would have and take a side and say, well, of course, that's not right, in which case you could get in trouble because you will actually be violating the law as it says. Again, it's important for you to know that. Best probably legal advice I can give you is just be very careful in getting into these discussions in the first place. Again, I think this is the most dangerous and most important part of the law as it exists now, but it's not the only part. So let's get into those other two sections as well. Next, as I said, the law prohibits you as a teacher district or you as a teacher giving credit to students for their engagement in the political process. What it states is that you may not require or make a part of a course or award a grade or a course credit, including extra credit, for a student, and again, I'm quoting from the law here, political activism, lobbying, or efforts to persuade members of the legislature or elected branch of the federal, state, or local level to take action by direct communications. Again, a lot of words meaning one thing that is really common or has been common for years, I think, particularly in social studies, civics, government classes, where the teacher has had the students write a letter on some topic that they're interested in, something that they would like the legislature to do or like the legislature to know. They don't tell the student what to write about, but again, the student writes a letter. That is now prohibited. You cannot require it. You cannot give a grade for it. You cannot give extra credit for it. That is a violation of the law. It goes on to say, this particular law says you also cannot give, again, grade, course credit, or extra credit for a student's participation in any internship, practicum, or similar activity, including social or public policy advocacy. Again, this probably doesn't come up in the classroom as much as letter writing assignments used to, but again, you need to be careful. The student who goes out and volunteers, whether it's for a political campaign or whether it is for some kind of nonprofit, some social organization or something like that, you cannot give them any kind of academic credit for their participation in that kind of program anymore. So let's go into the last part of what the law prohibits. And this is the quote unquote critical race theory of the law. Now, one thing it's important to know about the law never actually uses the term critical race theory. That's a term we've all heard at this point. I don't think very many people, I can't claim to have a really good understanding of what critical race theory is myself. It is an academic concept basically dealt with at the higher education level, but because it has been grabbed onto by the media and by politicians, a lot of people have very definite attitudes about what it means. And so what this law has done is it has taken some of the understandings of what critical race theory are and prohibited them. Again, whether or not they have anything to do with critical race theory as it actually exists or not. But it is important for you to know basically what it is that is prohibited by this law. So let's go through what the law says that you cannot do. First, the law prohibits districts from engaging in any kind of staff training that presents race or sex stereotyping or blame based on a person's race or sex. Now, I doubt a whole lot of that was going on before. I think there may have been some individual examples across the state, but again, it cannot be required any kind of staff training that presents any kind of stereotyping or something that could be considered blame based on race or sex. It cannot require that a district or a teacher make a part of any course a concept that one race is inherently, superior to another, or an individual is, based on their race, sex, inherently superior. Again, kind of hard for me to imagine there's a lot of teachers out there that ever would have considered doing this in the first place. So probably not going to require a whole lot of changes to your lesson plans, would be my guess. So let's go on and see what else it says. Also, cannot require any course to teach the concept that an individual based on their race or sex is consciously or unconsciously racist, sexist, or oppressive. Now, again, this is one of the things that kind of understood that critical race theory did, was that, you may not be conscious of it, but you're racist, sexist, or oppressive simply because you are Anglo or something along those lines. Again, you cannot include that as a part of a course anymore. Again, I doubt there are a lot of people really intending to do that in the first place. Next, an individual should not be discriminated against because of their race or sex. Well, that's probably the most obvious thing that's been out there. Of course, individuals shouldn't be discriminated against based on their race or sex. Individual, because of their race or sex, bears responsibility for actions committed in the past. Again, kind of an understood thing about critical race theory, that segments of the population should feel guilty because of what's happened in the past. This prohibits any part of a course being concept of that. Again, hard to imagine that there is a whole lot of that planned as far as course content in the future, but it is prohibited by this bill. Cannot do it. If you were thinking of doing it, you cannot do it. Going on, also prohibits an individual, and again, any concept that an individual should feel bad because of their race or sex. Bad, guilty, that again, shouldn't feel bad because you are white, because you are Black, because you are Hispanic. It prohibits any kind of concept that meritocracy or appreciation of the work ethic were concepts created to oppress others. Again, probably not going to change many lesson plans out there. Finally goes on and says that it prohibits any concept that slavery is anything other than a deviation from the American ideal. Now, one thing that's important to note here, the law does not prohibit talking about slavery. The law does not prohibit teaching about slavery. The law actually acknowledges that slavery did exist and acknowledges that slavery was a very, very bad thing. Basically, what it says is that what you can't teach is that slavery was anything other than a deviation from what America was supposed to be in the first place. And then finally, the law says that you cannot require knowledge of the 1619 Project. For those of you who don't know what the 1619 Project was, it was an idea that basically started that the United States began where America began with the advent of slavery. And it was something that was started, I think, with the New York Times. Again, probably not something that was looming very large in a lot of lesson plans in Texas, but the legislature wanted to make sure that there was not a tidal wave of 1619 projects going on in this next year. So this is again prohibited. Finally, the law prohibits a student from being disciplined for discussing any of the concepts that we just went over. Now, again, I said in the slide here, how is this going to work? Again, you cannot discipline a student for wanting to discuss any of these concepts that we just talked about. So, and the law doesn't say that student discussing a concept in a way that is adverse to what can be taught is okay to discipline the students. Again, law says you cannot discipline the students for discussing the concept. And if you go back to talking to basically the prohibition on discussing currently debated issues and what you as a teacher have to do when you are discussing currently debated issues, and critical race theory certainly is something that falls under a controversial, currently debated social issue. Again, what the law says is that you are supposed to deal with these issues from diverse viewpoints, and you are not supposed to take a side. Of course, the law then goes on to include that in your lessons, you are supposed to take these very definite sides about these very definite issues. Difficult position for you to be in. I wish I could tell you that there was anything other than it being a difficult position for you to be in, but I can't. This is basically the law as it exists as for now. Now, like I said, this is the law as it exists for now. It is very possible that the law is going to change. We have two bills that are currently up for debate in the special session that is going on now. Actually, I heard just before we started this webinar that one of the bills, Senate Bill 3, is actually being voted on by the Education Committee, possibly as we speak, sometime this afternoon or this evening. That does not mean it's going to pass. It doesn't mean it's going to become law, but it is actually going to be voted on possibly to go out of the committee to the House in general. So let's talk just a little bit about these two other bills, Senate Bill 3 and House Bill 28. What do they say? How are they different from the current law? Again, what we've talked about so far is actually current law. It actually goes into effect tomorrow and will be in effect until they are superseded by some new law. It possibly will be something that comes out of Senate Bill 3, possibly will be something that comes out of House Bill 28. We don't know. What I've described so far is what the current law is, but it may change. Now, I will tell you, both Senate Bill 3 and House Bill 28 in their current forms, and those forms can change because they're still in the legislative process. Like I said, in their current forms, they are generally very similar to House Bill 3979. In other words, they're very similar to what I just described. The way they're different mainly is in the TEKS, in what they tell the State Board of Education to do regarding changes to the Civics and Social Studies TEKS. Remember that 3 pages worth of specific things that needed to be included in the TEKS from House Bill 3979. Both Senate Bill 3 and House Bill 28, as they currently exist, do not have those 3 pages of topics included in the TEKS. That is the major change between these new possible laws and the current law. The 2 new possible laws still do include the same language regarding discussing current events that I've discussed before. In other words, cannot take a side, need to discuss it from different sides. They have that same language in them now. Could change before they get passed, but as it is now, they have the same language. They also have the same language prohibiting teaching the critical race theory concepts that we went through. So by and large, as they are now, the laws that could be passing are very similar, especially in the important ways to what we've talked about so far, but that could change in the legislative process. So, quick takeaways. First, if I haven't made it clear, hopefully I have, I will say right now again, be very careful when discussing current events if you're going to do it. Be very thoughtful about deciding whether you're going to do it in the first place, particularly if you know it's going to be a topic that's going to be controversial wherever it is that you are actually teaching. Next, again, be very aware that you cannot give student credit for letter writing, to their legislatures, or engaging in some kind of work for nonprofit social organization or something like that. And again, be very careful in dealing with students who are expressing opinions on critical race theory. Because again, like I said, you can get into a conundrum of trying to follow the law and getting in trouble, or getting in trouble for not following the law. So again, you need to be very careful. So finally, and hopefully we have some questions to talk about, but I want to say thank you. And of course, I'm a lawyer, so there has to be a long little disclaimer here about the information we have, because that's the way lawyers are. We have to always include some fine print here. So again, but thank you for listening here. We will keep you updated. Again, this could change because, again, legislative process is ongoing. If it does change, we will let you know ASAP. If the change is major, we may do another webinar, but we will certainly post something on the website, may put a blog out, something like that, but we will let you know if anything changes from the information we've shared here. And so, Kate, do we have any questions?
We do have questions, and I'm not surprised. First question, so a little clarification on the letter writing. And if you want to go ahead and stop sharing, Paul, then we can.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Put us both on
Thank
screen.
you for, sure y'all have made it through the disclaimer by now.
So if a student wants to write a letter to their state representative, and it's not for a grade, it's not for extra credit, but is an educator still allowed to encourage them to do so?
It doesn't say anything about not encouraging. It basically says they cannot get credit for it. And again, it does go, you can't give extra credit either. It's not just credit, but as long as they're not getting any kind of academic benefit from it, I think it's okay. So yeah, you don't need to, you can certainly encourage it. You can certainly say it's a great thing to do. There's no problem at all with that.
On a related note, what if students are raising money for a nonprofit, for a charity? Is that something that's allowable as a concept? I mean, is that something that a teacher could give credit for?
No. Or I would say, and honestly, the law and the law doesn't specifically address that, but I would say that the intent of the law would be no. If it says you can't give credit for participation in some kind of social activity like that, raising money, I would say would definitely be participation, social activity like that. So yeah, I think that would definitely run afoul of the law. Again, you can encourage it, as long as that encouragement does not somehow reflect in grades. Again, either credit or extra credit, or somehow there is some kind of academic benefit to it. And I will tell you, I would be very leery of trying to find some way around that. In other words, well, I won't give academic credit, but we'll figure out some backdoor way of giving academic credit. I would be very careful. Again, encouragement's fine, but really, they've been very clear. They do not want it to the student to get any kind of benefit, academic benefit from it.
So how another question, thinking about, I think, it's very clear that current events are a danger zone for sure. What about, when talking about slavery, I think, there is a plaque in the Capitol that I'm sure many of our members are familiar with, that several legislators have tried to get removed because it uses the some of the phraseology that offers alternative reasoning for why the Civil War occurred, and kind of the whole Southern pride situation.
States' rights, yeah.
So my question is is an educator required to discuss that framing of the Civil War based on this law and the effort to present all viewpoints?
Yes, I would say that is true. Again, there are a lot, and if I didn't make it clear before, I will say it outright. I believe this law contradicts itself in the different provisions, because it says, in talking about the critical race theory, you can't teach certain things, and in talking about debating controversial social issues, which critical race theory certainly is a controversial social issue, says you have to give all sides and can't take a particular side on it. So how that contradiction would actually work out as far as an individual teacher and individual situation, I wish I could tell you as a lawyer, but I can't. Again, it shouldn't be there in the law, but it is. But I can tell you that the law is very clear that, yes, you have to give deference. I gave two extreme, one very extreme example, the most extreme I could come up with, which is the terrorism example, that yes, you have to give the terrorists equal time. Terrorists kill a bunch of innocent people. Yeah, you got to explain how terrorists don't have access to the same resources that industrialized nations do. So perhaps they need to use means such as that. As ridiculous as that sounds, and really it's difficult for me to say it because I believe it's ridiculous. The law says that. The law says that you need to do that. The law does not give any exceptions for, unless it's terrorists. So that is the case. And again, something easier, like what were the foundations or the reasons for the Civil War? Again, that is an easier one. Harder for a teacher to say, well, I was not able to the best of my ability, even to the best of my ability, I couldn't, engage in diverse viewpoints on this one. I don't think that works on that. So yes, I think you do have to, as a teacher, basically give, to the extent that you can, all the different viewpoints. Now, again, you could spend a week talking about all the different viewpoints of what the causes of the U.S. Civil War were, without probably without getting through all of them. But it's going to be important. And this is because this is the law. You want to make sure that whatever it is that happens, if a controversy arises, you cannot be accused of not following the law. Because honestly, that's the most dangerous thing, obviously, for a teacher, is violating the law. Your contract says that you will follow the law. It's obviously grounds for the negative employment action to violate the state laws of Texas. So you want to be able to have a best argument that you can that you were following the law. So yeah, ultimately, yes, you're going to have to. And as much as that can cause controversy with a parent who is not happy with what their child comes home and says they heard you say, there's going to be the defense that you were required to do that under the law. And as a lawyer, I will tell you, I would much rather have a client as a teacher who had a defense that law made me do it than otherwise. But again, you need to be very cognizant if you're going to get into these things, rather than just shutting down the discussion in the first place. I don't know whether that's what the legislature had intended in the first place, that, okay, we're going to make it to where teachers just won't have these discussions in class. no idea. But I got to tell you, again, that is by far the safest thing for a teacher to do, is you just don't get into it.
So this is an interesting question. Could a social media post on your personal account discussing an issue, for instance, showing support for Black Lives Matter, could that affect you under this law?
I don't think it will affect you under this law, because it is pretty clear that this law deals with what happens in the classroom. Now, that said, it can affect you. If you do not know, any social media post that a public school teacher posts that it becomes public knowledge, if it creates a disruption in the school, that is actually a disruption in the classroom somehow or another, it makes it harder for the teacher to teach. School district can take action based on that. And that's even true if the First Amendment applies to the situation. The US Supreme Court decided that back in the 1970s, that there's a balancing test, that even if the First Amendment applies to a teacher's speech, the school district can balance that teacher's First Amendment rights to say whatever it is they said with the efficient operation of the school district. And if the district can show that the speech, whatever it is, has affected the district's ability, all of a sudden parents are asking that their kids be pulled out of a teacher's class because they don't want their kid in the teacher's class anymore. They're going to, school board and raising Cain at that level. It is possible, again, even if the First Amendment applies, it is possible that that teacher can suffer serious negative employment action for that. Even though, again, I don't think this law would apply to it, but there can be serious consequences for that.
We have several questions about specifically AP courses, which I think is interesting. One says it's just kind of a statement. I'm assuming that we're not allowed to give a grade for political activity, even if it's required by the College Board within the AP Government and Politics class.
That's a very good question. I would say the answer to that is yes. Again, this is one of those. This is not. Sadly, this is no offense.
Seems like they didn't think a lot of this.
This is not the most well thought out law that's out there. But again, it was very clear. And prior to giving course credit, I would definitely get that vetted by the administration on up. And I'm thinking probably the answer is going to be no, you can't.
So related, AP Human Geography, they discuss redlining, which is, just in case anyone, I was not immediately thinking what it was, not being an AP Human Geography teacher, but that is, of course, when the banks draw lines on a map and refuse to lend money to people living in that neighborhood. Would the law prohibit that? Discussing that concept, because that certainly is, I think, but I mean,
and and I will tell you that that's a new concept for me.
Well, and I will say, I will just say too that my understanding of, and again, I have a limited understanding reading about it, but I think that is a concept that is certainly part of the definition of systemic racism, which would fall under the whole discussion of critical race theory. So not being a lawyer, it seems like even though AP Human Geography requires it, that is a potential danger zone, maybe? It
would be, yeah. And because this law is new, there has not been, and because the law is new, and again, because COVID kind of took over everything, over the course of the summer, I don't think there has been that much attention placed on curriculum so far as the law is concerned, particularly at the district level. My advice to teachers that are out there is, if you have a question as to whether something is acceptable or not, get it vetted from your administration first, because they honestly may not have thought about it. They may not have had a chance to look at it. There is a lot of CYA in being able to say that you checked with your, your curriculum director or whoever is the appropriate person in your particular district, and they said it was okay to teach it. As from the teacher's perspective, that puts you in a much, again, as a lawyer who spends most of his time representing teachers, that puts you in a much better position than if you're out there by yourself just doing it because it was in, it was in your curriculum to begin with, and excuse me, just didn't ask. So again, if you have a question like that, I would definitely raise it with the administration as to what their opinion on it is, so that you're not out there on that limb by yourself.
And so I think, if I'm understanding correctly, the penalties for breaking this law or being perceived as breaking this law would be negative employment action. So it does seem like if you did run it up the chain and discuss these topics, that would be a CYA.
Yeah. And again, it's not your call at that point. Mm-hmm. It was your administrator's call at that point. So that's what the administrators get paid to do.
Yes. So another question, how would this affect ethnic studies courses?
Substantially, well, and depending on the curriculum, of course, it could substantially. Again, I don't know how far critical race theory had gotten into the K through 12 curriculum at this point. It started out as a higher ed concept and hasn't been around that long in the first place. So I don't know how far it had gotten in, but it certainly could. There's nothing that prohibits ethnic studies in this law, but it definitely does give parameters for what can be included in ethnic studies class. And again, the critical, again, quote unquote, critical race theory part of it prohibits teaching concepts that are along the lines of critical race theory. So those that are out there do need to be looking at your curriculum to see if those concepts are included in the curriculum. Probably most traditional curriculums aren't going to include those because, again, I think this is all relatively new. But it's not impossible. And if you're on the cutting edge with your curriculum and had included those before, then you are going to have to go through and rethink that, because again, it is prohibited. And again, even if the law changes, which I think there is a very good chance that one of these bills is going to supersede the law as it is now, I think the bill that supersedes it is going to have these same prohibitions as far as critical race theory. I think they're included now, and I don't see any real reason to believe they're going to be taken out.
What about, is there any issue with playing clips of Martin Luther King Jr.'s "I Have a Dream" speech or the letter from the Birmingham jail?
I have not read the letter from the Birmingham jail in some time. I actually have, but I cannot say that I remember exactly what it says. And I haven't heard the whole "I Have a Dream" speech in a long time either. I cannot say that, oh no, we can't do that. But honestly, you are going to have to review everything to see. I
guess that seems like
it seems, I mean, I would say off the top of my head, I find it kind of unlikely that Martin Luther King, his general attitude wasn't coming from that direction, but I cannot tell you that, oh no, anything that Martin Luther King said is safe. Again, you're gonna have to be careful with it.
That's why I think it's an interesting line with like history and current events though, because I mean, certainly in the 60s, it was controversial to have integrated lunch counters and schools. But I mean, I guess, they're not, is the law saying that you have to teach both sides or all sides of historical issues or just current events?
The law says current events or controversial issues under debate now, which the problem is history is a controversial issue under debate now. And it is going to be, and I will tell you that it is going to be very possible for someone with a complaint to frame it as a controversial issue under debate now. There is, again, one of the things we read about a lot now is the idea that facts exist is getting questionable. Things that were just basically accepted that, oh, this is just the history. This is just what happened. We're just discussing what it is that happened. Is not accepted as anymore. Now you can debate it. And again, that is very definitely one of the issues that is controversial and currently being debated is what history really is. So it is going to be dangerous to basically say, well, I'm just talking about history. Because you could very well have somebody say, well, you're also talking about something that is currently under debate and controversial, because it can be both. And so, again, the law contradicts itself. I mean, I wish, again, as a lawyer, I don't like that. I wish it didn't, but the law does say two different things. It says you have to examine issues from both sides. If you're talking about something that is controversial and currently in debate and can't take any particular side yourself. But the critical race theories part says that you can't teach these particular things. Again, I believe that contradicts itself. And I think in practice, it's going to contradict itself. But that's where we are now.
So a couple of questions about where the law applies. Does this, what if someone teaches an early college, high school dual credit course? So does this law affect only K through 12, or does it bleed over into the college level? And what if it's like an early college, high school dual credit course?
I think if it's dual credit, this law applies, and it only applies to college, the high school credit part of the dual credit. But if the student is getting high school credit along with the college credit, the law applies to it. And the law doesn't say that, but I'm confident that, again, if there's high school credit applied to the course, this law is going to apply.
Is there a difference between an elective and a required course?
No, the law does not make any. The only distinction the law makes at all is as far as this type of course or that type of course is some of the law only applies to civics and social studies classes. But as far as the teaching critical race theory or discussing controversial events, it applies to anyone.
Other than political beliefs, where else, like how could this law affect science? The example given is that many scientists believe in evolution, but many religions believe that humanity was created by God. So creationism versus evolution. And there are parents that disagree with teaching evolution. So is that another example of something that could fall under this law?
It could. And really, I don't think, again, I think that's something that the legislature either didn't consider or decided that they just didn't feel like considering. But again, there's no carve out for science. You could debate whether there's some difference in science or not, but the same thing I said before about history, about whether there is such a thing as fact now or whether everything is debatable, is itself open to debate. And so I cannot say that, oh no, it is safe. Now, I do think, again, as far as the current events and controversial issues, there are some things that aren't being debated that much right now. And again, this is a gray area, and I can't tell you that. Okay, and evolution's a good example of it. I can't tell you that, okay, nobody really doesn't believe in evolution anymore. So yeah, you don't have to give, deference to the other side. I do think there is an argument though that the law doesn't apply to that, because again, that's not the type of issue, that's part of the curriculum. That's not the type of side discussion of current events and controversial social issues that I think this law was intending to get at. Now, again, that's personal opinion. The law goes into effect tomorrow, so clearly there has not been any judicial interpretation of it as to what the parameters of it are. So I cannot tell you that anything is absolutely safe. But no, I don't think the biology teachers out there need to go through and change all their lesson plans to give equal time to the creationists.
But someone just put in the question, would teaching climate change be affected by this law?
Teaching climate, yes. I think so, yeah, climate change would. I mean, that is too big. That is too much in debate now.
Paul, who's the arbiter of what's in the
arbiter is going to be whoever you individual teacher are sitting in front of that is questioning what it is you did. And I'm sorry that's the case.
Then that gets to the whole community standards thing,
yeah,
because
right.
What's acceptable in Beaumont might not be acceptable.
And honestly, and I will tell you, yes, that is
Odessa.
And that is very important. And I spend more time talking to student teachers about this than regular teachers, but it is a topic I talk to student teachers about a lot. You need to know your community. There are things that mostly anyway are not going to be controversial in Austin, Texas, but would be controversial in the Panhandle, and vice versa. There are things that you could say in the Panhandle that wouldn't be controversial there at all and would be very controversial to say in Austin, Texas. Now you may have the random student that doesn't fit the mold in either place, and parent that doesn't fit the mold in either place, but it's important for you to know, for you to understand basically the danger. It's important for you to know what your individual parents are, what their standards are, what their expectations are. Are they going to get up in arms over a particular issue, you saying a particular thing, or are they not? Another important issue is how sophisticated are your kids? There's a big difference between talking about controversial things and this is something that somebody brought it up in AP class before, to AP history students than it is to a regular, 5th grade history class. Are your kids going to understand the difference between your obligation to present all different sides of an issue and not take a particular side yourself, and understand that you may be required to do that by the law, or your kid's not going to understand that, or the kid is the kid going to go home to their parents and say, guess what Ms. Starbucks said? My 1st grade teacher. I'll just call out to my 1st grade teacher, Ms. Starbucks.
Or if I like to go to coffee. Another question we've got, what about showing a student news program? I mean, like CNN 10, or back in my day, it was Channel 1. We used to also watch Assignment the World. I'm really showing my age here, but what about those kind of programs that are designed to show students about current events?
I think that there's nothing that prohibits this, as long as, again, the content doesn't include critical race theory, because that is prohibited. But there's nothing that's prohibited. You just have to make sure that, especially if it's something that you are bringing to the curriculum like that, you need to make sure that you can explain why it is that you showed that, and especially if you didn't show something else. The other side. You didn't show a clip from Fox News to go along with the clip from CNN. And again, can be an important distinction between you're planning a curriculum, which the prohibitions then I keep referring to them as critical race theory prohibitions, just because that's the shortest way of, there are 4 slides worth that I went through of what they are. The critical race theory prohibitions, those cannot be included in your lesson plan. You can't plan on having those in your curriculum. You can't have stuff in your curriculum that you don't, again, I don't believe that the law says your curriculum has to give equal time to all different aspects of every side of an issue. In discussion of it, you better be prepared to do that. But your curriculum doesn't actually have to be planned along those lines. If a student, if you're talking about, and this is just an example, you are talking about Civil War, and your textbook, the Civil War textbook that you have, talks and probably is going to say something about states' rights, and probably is going to say something about the slavery issue, and probably is, seems like I remember my textbooks having all of that stuff in it before. So you're probably going to be okay there, just with using the curriculum. But actually, probably a better example now that I'm thinking about is the science one that we came up before, with evolution. You can plan your lesson, your evolution lesson, just to go over evolution. Now, if a student brings up creationism, then you're probably going to be in a position of having to say, look, that is another perspective on this. Our curriculum is this. That is another perspective. Other, people have different perspectives. Something along those lines. Again, I wish I could tell you that there was an easy way out, but I said to begin with, this was law created extremely difficult positions for teachers to be in. And I have thought about it for a while since this law got passed, even before preparing this webinar. I haven't come up with if you do this, you're safe. Here is your magic bullet. There isn't one, at least that I am aware of so far. It is going to be a difficult position for you to be in. But again, I don't think, as far as creating your curriculum, you're going to have to go outside of, again, short of critical race theory. And if you had something where you were going to give kids credit for writing letters to their legislators, you're not going to have to change anything there.
Okay. We have time for one more question, which is what we've got, which is good. If a student selects a topic that's a current issue and the student's presenting to the class, do they have to present both sides, or is it just when the teacher is using it?
No, just teacher. Honestly, yeah, none of this applies to students. This is all entirely the responsibility of the teacher. So no, student does not. And like I said, with the critical race theory part, the law actually prohibits disciplining a student for, and it doesn't, again, the law does not distinguish between a student making a comment pro-critical race theory or anti-critical race theory. It says that a student cannot be disciplined for comments that they make on those issues. So no, the law does not require a student to give equal time to the different sides. I think you could, and obviously I think teachers regularly do this as a part of an assignment, basically say, I want you to, but the law doesn't require it.
So, I'm just gonna, as we wrap up, ask you to do something I don't think attorneys like to do, which is make predictions, but what becomes of this law? I mean, I think it's likely we're going to get something slightly worse passed, or slightly more difficult passed, at least more prescriptive in terms of the TEKS passed during the special session. But I mean, is this something that gets challenged in the courts? Is it something that educators need to talk to their lawmakers about to attempt to address in 2023? I mean, this is going to have a serious chilling effect on the ability to teach. And I guess where do we go from here?
I wish I knew where I see it going, and hopefully not. but where I see it going is individual teachers having these issues that I talked about, either because they've tried to follow the law and so they have said something controversial because, again, they're getting all sides to an issue and some parent complains about it and they're having to deal with that parent complaint on a very local level. I think that's the thing that is most likely to come up. You know, we do have the issues. I mean, it's going to be very easy. You know, the again, part about the change to the TEKS, don't have to worry about that. The part about giving students credit for letter writing or participating in social organizations, that's an easy one. You just don't do it. I mean, there's no, you know, that's not a hard thing to be safe about. The difficult ones are, again, kind of what's the parameters of these sort of general themes that the law prohibits talking about. There's some very good questions about, well, is this prohibited or is that prohibited? As far as specific things, it's going to be hard to tell exactly how expansive the definition is going to be, as far as, you know, a teacher being disciplined for violating this, because again, that's where it's going to come down to. There's no fines, there's no, you know, nobody's getting called, you know, hauled off to jail or anything like that for violating this law. The worst case scenario is negative employment action, theoretically certification action, but I don't really see that as a realistic threat either. I think it really is, it's going to be an issue with your job. The dangerous one is going to be that talking about current events and controversial issues. That's going to be the one that teachers are going, if they do it, teachers are going to find themselves in the most uncomfortable position with. And again, safest thing is, and I hate to say it because it is anathema to good teaching, I have to say, is don't do it. You know, don't get into the discussions. And again, I hate to say that as somebody who loves working with teachers, because I love teachers, I love what you do. And that's terrible to have to say that. But as a lawyer, that's the only way I can say that you're going to be safe, because there is no safe way of discussing this stuff, following the law and being safe from having parent complain because they heard you said something that sounded crazy. Like, we have to understand terrorists too.
This is a really tough one. And Paul, thank you so much for succinctly expressing all of this. We really appreciate it. I do want to invite everyone next Tuesday at the same time. We will be having another webinar about the latest in COVID-19 on campus, which is another current event that could be controversial to discuss. But we will be discussing the latest in terms of what's going on with the courts on that and your rights on campus and vaccines and all that good stuff. So if you haven't signed up for that yet, please do so, and have a great evening. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for all you do and for spending a little time this evening with us.
Take care.
Thank you.